Hello, this is Corey Olsen, the Tolkien Professor, and you are listening to part one of a special podcast episode called The Minstrel, the Painter, and the Scholar, a roundtable discussion with John D. Bartolo, Ted Nasmith, and Corey Olsen. John, Ted, and I are all lovers of Tolkien who are engaged in interpreting his work in different ways. John D. Bartolo is the singer and songwriter for the Lonely Mountain Band, who have recently released a new album of Tolkien-inspired music titled Beyond the Western Seas. Ted Nasmith is one of the most celebrated Tolkien illustrators in the world, and his paintings have appeared in Tolkien calendars and illustrated editions of the texts. I, Corey Olsen, am a literary scholar and host of a podcast featuring lectures and academic discussions of Tolkien's books. Recently, the three of us thought it would be fun to get together by Skype and have a conversation about what we do in our different spheres as we interact with the books that we all love and admire.
Of the last high king among the exiles of Middleearth. From the sea to the mountains I carved a free path after the war of wrath. The first to distrust the deceiver of man, wise master of radiant star. Alone of the Eldar, forbid and attar. Wise king, lose not thy grip on me, for my blade is purer than snowfall, and my skin is keener than ice. Hold me fast among thine enemies, for I am the spear. Yes, I am the spear. Cold I glows.
So my first question was for John, and my question was, when you're writing songs, how do you relate to Tolkien's own songs and poetry? Do you consciously try to emulate or even distance yourself from the tone and style of his various poems? Because, of course, he has different feels and different modes for his different characters and situations. How do you kind of place yourself against all that when you're writing?
Well, specifically with this album, because there are some tracks on the CD that we were specifically drawn from Tolkien's lyrics and poems that appear in the books. I try to, for myself, I try to hear in the poetry itself what Tolkien was trying to get across as far as the mood. Mood is, I would imagine, most important to me as far as trying to relay what the poem is saying in terms of music. Obviously, if the mood of the music is out of sync with the content of the poem, it could create some sort of, dissonance as far as what the listener is feeling. So, for myself, and specifically with Tolkien's own lyrical content, whatever feelings Tolkien's poem evokes in me is what I try to translate to the guitar. And specifically with this album, it was acoustic guitar. So that was the driving instrument on this album. So, for example, Lament of Eorl the Young.
Right.
There is a real and of course that Lament of Eorl the Young draws heavily upon the Wanderer poem. So the sentiment in that poem, for me, was one of passing and one of lamentation. So to me, that song is really a lamentation. So I try to identify with that sentiment in the song and in my voice and the way I sang the lyrics. With a song like Song of Durin's Awakening, that was a little different in that the arrangement of that song was inspired by a version done by Colin John Rudd, who posted his version of Song of Durin's Awakening on YouTube and that was a catalyst and an inspiration for me to do that song myself, and pretty much use his general arrangement as far as the cadence of the lyrics and everything. But I just brought the production to as high a level as I could possibly do, including, emulating dwarven chants in the background, the Baruch Kazad chant, and anvil sounds. So with that song, it was really about transporting the listener to Middle-earth as much as I possibly could, with sound effects and dwarven chanting, and really trying to relay the passing glory of Moria. So and then the other one, Fall of Gilgalad, I kind of had a different take on Fall of Gilgalad. It was more of like a nursery rhyme sentiment for me. And not so much, in the story, it's a fragmentary poem. They allude to the fact that this is from a longer lay that is now missing, and just that fragment remains. I believe Bilbo interpreted that and then wrote the Fall of Gilgalad in the story of the book, and so that was. I didn't feel so much lamentation of that. It was more of a heroic piece for me that lent itself to a nursery rhyme. I don't know why, it just came out that way. So there is some different method of interpretation, but I take it song by song. I think that answered the question.
Yeah. Do you catch yourself trying to emulate or echo any of his sort of lyrics or poetical moves when you're composing your own, like the lyrics for the Ballad of I Glows, for instance? Do you find yourself kind of slipping into it, or deliberately imitating any of the meters or the word choice in his existing poetry?
Well, I think it's unconscious. The emulation becomes unconscious because I'm so into the Tolkien mode, quote unquote, as far as when I'm writing that material. And I'm probably, at that time when I'm writing, either coming from the text or some other media related to Tolkien. So I do try to put myself, in his chair, so to speak. And as far as poetry is concerned, I really identify with the way he writes. So I think just, through osmosis, it's become an unconscious way of writing, I guess, the poetry. And the Ballad of I Glows specifically was for me a really great accomplishment. I really enjoyed trying to put myself in a personified spear. It's kind of like that northern idea of an item or a weapon having its own personality. So yeah. I tried to think that the starting point for that song for me was, okay, I know I'm going to write a song called The Ballad of I Glows, which actually, I must say, the title, The Ballad of I Glows, comes from Lord of the Rings Online. There's a quest that minstrels need to go on in the game, and you've got to go find these different fragmentary pieces within the game, and then when you have all these fragmentary parts together, you then can compose the Ballad of I Glows. So that was my initial cue, and that name, the title, just really grabbed me. And then I began researching the spear I Glows, and I thought, wow, it would be really interesting to trace any record in the writings, in the lore, of wherever Gilgalad might have taken I Glows with him. So it was written from the perspective of I Glows.
Yeah, that's neat. It's interesting. It's been making me think as I've been listening to your CD. I'm also teaching my Anglo-Saxon class, and there are a couple poems that we've been reading. One Beowulf, and the other The Dream of the Rood. Which The Dream of the Rood is told almost entirely from the perspective of an inanimate object. Right? The Dream of the Rood is the crucifixion story told from the perspective of the cross. And my students and I were really struck by the way in which the poet personifies the object and sort of retells the story from its perspective. And we were just also reading in Beowulf the description of the fight between Beowulf and Grendel, and there's this wonderful moment in the middle of the fight, right before Grendel's arm gets ripped off, where the fight is essentially told for a few lines from the point of view of the hall itself, of Heorot, and how the fight begins to be briefly characterized almost as Beowulf and Grendel against the hall, as of course they're running around and smashing things. But we get this brief sort of glimpse of almost empathy with the hall and its perspective itself. So I think that it was just sort of a neat combination of things for me recently, because I think that idea of writing a song from I Glows the Spear's perspective seems sort of very right, like the very kind of thing that I think Tolkien would have been really interested in. It's exactly what, as you mentioned before, a lot of like Anglo-Saxon and Norse poetry is already interested in, and I think that's really neat.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's definitely a northern sentiment as far as the personification of weapons, and we've seen it now in fantasy so much, with Stormbringer and some of the Michael Moorcock stories and other stories. Now it's become popularized, but I think I don't know. It may be present in other cultures too, but as far as I know, it's really prominent in that northern warrior spirit. But yeah, thank you. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's just very well observed.
Great. Well, Ted, I have my question for you. In your artwork, what have you found hardest to capture about Tolkien's world? What kinds of things have you just found really most challenging to do?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that one is confronting there, and it's hard to think about what it felt like early on when I was just trying to come to grips with those things, whether it was epic scenes of battle and costumes that might be used in a world like Tolkien's. I mean, I tended to make things a little harder for myself by thinking Middle-earth is, although it's similar to, say, medieval Europe or prehistory in other ways, it seems to be, and in the late Victorian, mid-Victorian sort of society in the Shire, all these various kinds of levels of time frames kind of blended together in a sort of rough mix in a way, because Tolkien's kind of making it up as he goes along himself, and if you know the writing process there. So you try to sort of bring some intelligence, and like for me, that sense of otherness that he describes, I think, in some ways when he refers to his work, leaving things to the imagination, the sense that you're peering into a lost time. So how to make it explicit and explore it in that sort of wonderful way, bring it alive, but at the same time not have it, you become too habituated to it, or it becomes too real, so that it does remain mysterious and remote, and sort of has that sort of mystique about it. I mean, to me, fantasy, by definition, it involves some sort of a strange tension between imagination and reality, story, impressions, and with Tolkien's being so detailed and explicit in one sense, and yet it seems to hold back at the same time. It's sort of a tantalizing thing. Now, he is not around, of course, and as an illustrator, there are many times when I would have liked to have him to at least ask a question of, or consult, like those fortunate people who were able to write letters to him during his lifetime and have him answer, sometimes at quite great length, details of what he meant by this or that part of his legendarium or his story, or what this person or character might have been about, and all that sort of thing. So you have to kind of imagine the dialogue with him. I kind of play this, I guess, sort of game with myself where, I think of, like, if he had assigned me to, render his world in more visual terms, to bring it more to life in that sort of that way, in that particular art discipline, words versus visual, then how would I do that authentically, but not give up my own sense of what the interpretation. I mean, you can't get away from that. I'm the one doing it, so it's going to